Pulp Fiction is a crime film as directed by Quentin Tarantino and stars an ensemble cast including Samuel L. Jackson, John Travolta, Thurman, and Bruce Willis. So, Pulp Fiction, I think we can all agree this is one of the best films ever made.
See, I will say it's an amazing movie and I can see why everybody absolutely loves it. But as with most Tarantino movies, they just don't speak to me. But I can definitely see why people are raving about it, and I can definitely see why it is a classic.
Yeah, because like I know when we did Reservoir Dogs, you were not big on that film. I still think it's a great film, but I have softened my stance on it. Like it's still good, but it's not that strong. But this film for me, it's like, you know, Reservoir Dogs, but done much, much better and with more resources. Like, firstly, the script is like legendary.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's one of his best films, one of the best written scripts, and has some really iconic characters, for one, but two, it's sort of a lot of pop culture. It's something that's always referenced. Everybody knows it. He just hit a pinnacle with it, and I still today think it is the best script he's written, even though I'm a big fan of the rest of his films as well.
Yeah, because every film he made after this never seemed to reach the same level that Pulp Fiction did. Because anytime anyone talked about the best Tarantino film, everyone would say Pulp Fiction is his #1 best. And for me at least, I can say that no other Tarantino film has really gripped me or grasped me as well as Pulp Fiction, because this film just, in every single aspect, is done so perfectly and magnificently.
Well, saying that, I can definitely say that from, like, for me, it's probably my second best film that I've seen of his. Because I feel like I can completely agree, the script is amazing, and the way it's shot. For me, the big thing with Tarantino movies that I don't really personally find amazing for myself is I just don't like the structure of them. For me, they're just stories that are just like cut up, and you give little bits here and there, and they're on the continuities all just kind of jumbled a bit, which I can see why he does that in his films. And that's probably the bit that kind of loses me with most of his films, as they're not just... I prefer simple stories, and I felt like... and that's not what he typically does, and he's typically his stories tend to be quite more... they're different stories shown at different points of time,
yeah.
And I can definitely see why he's doing that. It's just, for me, that doesn't quite work, but I can definitely see with this film, much compared to the Reservoir Dogs, I did enjoy this one a lot more than I expected.
Yeah, with what you said about him telling a story out of order, I think that's a style that makes him iconic and you know, makes him stand out as a director, because you know, any director can like tell its story out of chronological order, and yet the way Tarantino does it, he's still able to make the film coherent to watch and, you know, be able to follow it easy. And it's a film that is worth multiple rewatches, because every time you watch it, you're gonna spot a detail you might have missed before. And it's like nice to see these three separate stories, you know, intertwine with each other.
Yeah, well that's the thing, and the reason he makes movies like that is he always looks at it as like a novel. So in a novel, you start in a particular period, you meet a character, and you may go back to see where that character came from, and then he interconnects like that. But for this, I think originally the idea of 3 separate shorts ultimately, and I think Tony Scott was going to direct one, he was going to write a couple, and then he was going to get someone else to write it, but then he decided to do it as a movie and just have these characters interconnect with each other and appear in each other's stories, and that's how it loosely ties it together. I think it could be like this special features like in Sin City, and be able to watch each separate one as a separate sort of short rather than all together, and see if they still work. And I think that's kind of cool that he did it like that. It was a different idea, and it went quite big for his second film. Like it's quite a huge step up from Reservoir Dogs, which was simple and basic, to being a bit more complicated with the story and having more characters, and really just delving into this, you know, crime story, noir sort of world in such a great way.
Yeah, that's one thing I have to give to this film. It feels very grounded.
Yeah, and I think this film, along with Jackie Brown, is in that early period of Tarantino's career where they were very simple and basic stories before he really went to bigger genre pictures such as, you know, like
westerns and war films.
Yeah, kung fu films and stuff like that. So even though I do like them, this is sort of the earlier period where he's just trying to keep it based in reality as much as he can before he starts to get into the other bigger genres that he later did in his career.
Yeah, and he's still essentially testing the waters in this film, because this is only his second film. And then like every film after this, he definitely gets bigger and bigger. And this is the film that establishes his trademarks, like the witty dialogue and how simple and mundane a conversation can be and yet still be, you know, entertaining to listen to. Because there's a scene in the movie where John Travolta and Uma Thurman are having dinner and like all they're talking about is like, you know, her TV show pilot. Like it's a pointless dialogue conversation, but like it's interesting to listen to because the little words like Tarantino puts in is like, you know, like when you hear him, they just grip you as like, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and it also shows his style, his way of like doing one single shot sometimes through a doorway, and that's the style that he later used in many other films and still does, and that's just his way of doing something different. And what also makes him great and this film great is it's really a reference to a lot of films that he loved growing up, a lot of throwbacks to old sort of cinema in this sort of genre, and he's able to pay homage to them in such a great way, and just the different things he uses that inspired him to do the things. Like the dance sequences was, you know, taken from Aristocats, you know, an animated Disney film. And it's just really clever what he's able to do. He's such a very relevant voice, I guess, when this film came out. He's a very relevant voice of the 90s, and this encapsulated his ability to express that and what he felt cinema was like in the time when he was around.
Yeah, this film is the perfect example of why I think the 90s was the best period for films, because you had many films breaking the boundary, you know, trying to be different, because you had Pulp Fiction, Fight Club, Goodfellas, Forrest Gump, Shawshank Redemption, Fargo, Seven. All of these films that if they were made in the 80s, 70s, or 60s wouldn't have been as groundbreaking. But because the 90s was such an edgy decade, films really became more challenging to watch, and, you know, they definitely, you know, became something, you know, interesting. It really became films for the film lovers.
Yeah, and there's still original stories and ideas out there where today the films just aren't as good, and we go long periods without great films. But in the 90s, there seemed to be a great film come out every week or every time at the cinema. There was 2 or 3 films that were really good.
Yeah, a nice constant stream of original films, not like, you know, today where it's just remake superhero film or just, you know, based on a franchise. Like, I feel like the 90s kind of spoiled us because every film released in the 2000s or 2010s, like, we do get the occasional gem, but like, I feel like films have suffered since the 90s.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be any original ideas anymore. It's like we've done everything now, and they just keep regurgitating the same film we've seen many times, just in a different way.
Yeah,
it's a bit boring.
And studios are afraid to take a risk with original ideas anymore. Because at least with Tarantino, he's one of the few directors who's still, you know, putting out these original ideas. So while this film is considered, you know, perfect, there is one slight issue that, like, it's a nitpick, but I want to mention it. There's all these on-camera goof-ups. In the scene where Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta are being shot at, before they get shot at, you can see behind them there's bullet holes behind them, and then once they do get shot, oh look, the bullet holes are already there. And then there's another scene where Samuel L. Jackson is talking to Ving Rhames' character about Quentin Tarantino's wife coming home, and there's a tracking shot of following her into the house, and you can see the shadow of the camera crew in the background. Little goofs like that don't really hurt the film for me, but they are there. Alright, so let's talk about our favorite moments in this film. What are your guys' favorite scenes?
For me, I personally, there was no standout scenes. I can definitely see why some of these scenes, specifically the burger scene and stuff like that, are huge cultural significant scenes and stuff like that. So overall, I'd probably say that would probably be the one scene that probably really stood out to me, just because it's been mocked throughout most films and most comedy these days, and it's a big scene.
Yeah, fair enough.
Well, my scenes are the scenes between John Travolta and Uma Thurman in the restaurant. I think is really great. There's some great dialogue back and forth. All their sort of storyline within that short is great. But my favourite by far is the last scene with Jules and Vincent in the cafe, and Jules is talking about leaving the life behind, and then Honey Bunny and the
Tim Roth character
are there about to rob it. I think all that sequence is really great because it shows him, it shows Jules has gone through this experience, he's changing. He could just kill these 2 people, but he decides not to. He decides he wants to help them. And I just really love that, and I think it's a great end to the film itself, and that's the story I like the most, is the Jules and Vincent storyline.
And that scene in particular is what I feel like Samuel L. Jackson should have won the Oscar for. For me, I have multiple favorite scenes, but if I was to say what my favorite chapter or segment of the film was, I kind of like the Bruce Willis stuff because, make no mistake, Bruce Willis now, he's not a great actor, but when he's given a good role, you know, he can be a convincing actor. And I just loved Bruce Willis in this movie. He was my favorite character because I just loved him being a boxer who screws over his boss and tries to make a run for it with the money. Another thing that I liked is the Ezekiel 25:17 speech by Samuel L. Jackson, like at the start of the film. Like that is just a great scene, iconic, you know, memorable dialogue, just great.
I like the music choices that he has in this film as well. I think they're all fitting for the scenes that they're showing. And I think another scene I actually really do like is the scene where Uma Thurman's character is ODing and they have to stab her with a syringe. That's quite a powerful and very funny scene.
Yeah.
And it's been talked about how that when he stabs her in the chest, it's actually shot in reverse. So it's actually him pulling it out we start from and then they go backwards with it. And I kind of like that, but it adds a bit of levity to the situation that's going on. And it is one of the scenes that's probably the most humorous in the whole film.
Overall, yeah, this film is a classic masterpiece. And like, well, there is a few issues. It's not really enough to really hurt this film. This film is still considered by many to be one of the greatest films of all time. And, you know, we agree.
Well, for me, I can definitely see for why this film is a classic. And in terms of filmmaking, it's a technical masterpiece. I can't really fault in any way, and most of my faults come from my personal opinion, just Tarantino doesn't speak to me. But overall, I do feel like it's an amazing film, and I have to give it no less than 8.5 out of 10 because I feel like it's a technical masterpiece. That's the way I describe it. Yeah,
I'm a big fan of this. I think this was one of his best scripts, and to come out with a film like this as his second film is quite extraordinary. It speaks to me in a lot of ways. There's some really great moments with characters. It's well shot and put together. And I just think it's iconic and great for a reason when we get to see that unfold on screen. It's a film I can go back to time and time again and still draw more out of it. And I think it's brilliant. I'm going to give Pulp Fiction 4.5 out of 5. I really enjoyed it and thought it was a great film.
For me, I still love this film, and this film deservedly is on my favorite movies of all time list for a good reason. Like you said, it's a technical marvel, you know, it's well acted, the script is phenomenal. It's a film where even if you're not the biggest fan, you can still find some enjoyment from it. And like for the runtime it doesn't feel like 2.5 hours. That time just flies by. This was a perfectly paced film and just, you know, a thrill to watch. And I'm gonna give Pulp Fiction a 10 out of 10. Thank you so much for watching. If you like what you see, be sure to like my Facebook page, follow me on Twitter, and subscribe to my channel below. As always, I'm NETX5. Thank you for watching.